but welcome to the Sustainability Experts Series. My name is Don Robinson. I'm the founder of Greening of Streaming and helping host today, joining the ranks, the erstwhile ranks of Janet. Thank you for all the organisation you've done, Janet. And of course, Ben, who's been the sort of mastermind behind many of these Sustainability Expert Series until today. So let's bring Ben in. Let me see if I can use the magic of Zoom to add Ben to the conversation. There we go. Hey Ben, how you doing?
Hi, I'm doing fine. Happy New Year, everybody. It's great to have you all here. It's been a long time coming. We've been talking about reporting in our industry, and it's really here, 2024. So I'm really excited to hear what the experts are going to tell us about it.
Yeah, we've got quite an interesting couple of hours coming up. Should we just whiz through the agenda? Ben, I think you've got it on slide, haven't you?
I have.
Okay, so what we've got over the first hour is we're going to have a look at the CSRD landscape, but as always with these new SES media policy sessions, we're going to ask John Enser to come to the front and give us a weather report, as we call it, and just give us a high-level view of all media policy issues and policy issues that are emerging that might affect the media industry, with a little bit of a leaning towards sustainability issues. And we're also going to ask John to give us a primer on CSRD so that we know in some detail what we're talking about for the following sessions. Then Arianna is going to join us and talk a lot about the considerations that we might have with regard to some of the media infrastructures, such as data centers and so on. Talk a little bit about what green investment is, and talk about some of the challenges that we face. Sophia's going to follow that with some discussions from the EBU perspective about implementation strategies and how these might affect you as a broadcaster working in this space. And then Eileen will be giving us something of a case study, looking into what they've been doing within their organisation. And then finally, we've got Rudolf. Rudolf's always good at helping us spot the things that we've missed and making us think deeply. So as we head into the second hour, which Ben will lead, Rudolf will hopefully set some fires as usual. So let's bring John in. How are you doing, John? Do you want to tell the audience who you are and then take us into the weather report and let us know what's hot in the media policy world at the moment?
Sure, yeah. No, so I'm John Enser. I am a partner at CMS, the international law firm. I've been specialising in media policy for many, many years. Obviously, media policy is now crosses into sustainability policy. And for my sins, I'm also a member of the board of Julie's Bicycle, which is one of the leading arts and culture sustainability charities in the UK. So it's an area of personal interest as well as professional interest for me. So in my weather report today, I am going to touch on a few sort of things of general approach before I just dig in gently to the headlines of the CSRD. So I guess three real things that have caught my eye in terms of what's going on in the media policy world at the moment. The first is in the UK, we have a media bill working our way through the UK Parliament. Doesn't really talk about sustainability at all. It has a little nod to sort of economic sustainability and saying wanting to make Channel 4 on a firm financial footing, but it doesn't really talk about sustainability. What it does do that's going to have quite a big impact in the streaming world is it puts in place a new regulatory framework that's going to operate between platform operators and the UK's public service broadcasters. So that's the BBC, ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5. They are going to have mandatory sort of must-carry status on a range of platforms, not only for their linear TV services, but also for their streaming apps and players. There are going to be prominence obligations. The prominence obligations are going to extend to metadata and other things, complications that, you know, if they're surfacing individual content, then they're going to have to surface content from those PSBs. So there's quite a lot of stuff going on there. It's been quite a contentious area. Other aspects of it, things like Netflix getting regulated in the UK. So that's one to watch. The next one to watch is the Christmas present from the European institutions, which is the European Media Freedom Act. Now, that reached political agreement on the 15th of December. political agreement is kind of the last stage before a directive or a regulation is formally adopted. It means that the three European institutions, that's the Commission, the Council of Ministers and the Parliament, have all reached an agreed place on what should be in the directive, and all they then need to do is just agree the fine-tuning of the words. And so they reached that stage on the 15th of December. What is the European Media Freedom Act, you might well ask? Well, it's a set of rules designed to protect media pluralism and independence in the EU. It's quite controversial because until recently, the member states were very clear, hands-off media regulation, that's something for national governments, it's not a pan-EU thing. But they've now sort of conceded that there is an EU dimension to this. And this is partly in response to the kind of rise of increasing interference in the media, particularly in some of the Central and Eastern European territories like Hungary and Poland. So the new rules are going to ensure that both public and private media are free to operate across borders in the single market. They embody a few things like no interference by regulators or governments in editorial decisions. They ban the use of spyware against journalists, an obligation on member states to include adequately funded public service media, some rules about ownership transparency, transparent and fair audience measurement systems, making sure states don't put all their advertising on their favorite right-wing media. The regulators, the individual national media regulators, have a new body called the European Board for Media Services, which is the old ERGA regulatory grouping, all squeezed into a new body. And the final piece is that there are going to be protections for the media against unjustified removal of their content on big online platforms. That's one to watch. Again, it's quite a sensitive area. The idea that there should be a category of media that people like YouTube are not going to be allowed to take down the content from those services, and how our government's going to distinguish between legitimate media and propaganda organizations. So that's one to watch. And then the final area is sort of media concentrations, where there are going to be new rules so that the European Commission can intervene to supervise what's going on if media organizations are merging in individual countries. Again, nothing about sustainability really in the European Media Freedom Act, EMFA, some stuff about wanting to make sure that there is economic sustainability of public media, but that's it. The third, and I'm going backwards in time, I guess, so on the 9th of December, political agreement was reached on the other big play in the European media world, which is the AI Act. I'm sure everybody's heard of the AI Act, understand that this is about introducing regulation to control the development of AI. And I'm not going to spend any time going into the detail of that because it's a bigger topic than I have time for today. But what I am going to talk about is that the AI Act does have some stuff in there about sustainability. It's very, very high level, and that was a watering down of an earlier position. The European Parliament wanted more, but that got watered down as part of the negotiations between the institutions, the so-called trilogue. So where we ended up was some provisions within the AI Act that requires the Commission to set European standardization organizations on a road to defining reporting and documentation processes to improve AI resource performance. So there's energy reporting and other sort of resource consumption, and on how to develop AI in an energy efficient way. So there is a nod to sustainability in relation to the AI Act, but it's kind of nothing more than that. It's just about, the Commission needs to set a roadmap for that. So it is quite interesting. There are some disclosure obligations. Again, it has one of the interesting things about the AI Act is it's sort of claims that it's going to have some degree of extraterritorial reach. So if you're a big US AI developer and you are putting your AI on the market in Europe, you're going to get caught by the regulation, even if you're based in the US. So there is some degree of protection coming in there, new rules on that. Again, that's one to watch, because the AI Act, again, has only reached political consensus so far. We don't have a final text. We're expecting final text soon-ish. So that's that. So in my last few minutes, I wanted to talk quickly about the CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. What is it? What's it there to do? How does it work? So the first point is it's a directive. What does that mean? Is a directive is an instruction to individual EU member governments to change their laws so that their local laws will require companies based in those countries to comply with the new rules. So a directive is only binding and enforceable on individual member state governments. It doesn't give direct rights and responsibilities and obligations on companies. The way that happens is every single country has to change its rules in order to bring the directive into force. And when they do that, they do it in slightly different ways based on their own legal system, legal culture, and so on. Now, the kind of unusual thing about the CSRD is, whilst the directive is then implemented on a country-by-country basis, the regulations that people have to follow in terms of the reporting guidelines are set on a pan-European basis. So you've got one level is done on a country-by-country basis, but then what it is introducing are these new reporting requirements, which are called the ESRs, and the ESRs are set on a pan-European basis. So ESRs, pan-European, directive implementation, country by country by country by country. Now, the way directive implementation works in practice is countries are really slow at doing it. They take their time, they eventually get there, but in theory, what is supposed to happen is a gradual introduction of these new reporting requirements. So first of all, it's going to go on big publicly listed companies who are already subject to sustainability reporting under the old rules, the NFRD. So those are going to have to start dealing with reporting in the current fiscal year. As soon as they have a new fiscal year that starts anytime after 1 January 2024, that's when these new rules kick in for big companies. For big companies that aren't publicly listed, but they are generally large companies, at least 250 employees, thresholds on revenue and balance sheet, that will kick in on their financial year that starts in 2025. Then the next year will go to medium-sized enterprises. And then finally, in 2026, there are rules also coming in for small enterprises that actually they still have to reach certain thresholds. All of those come in. There are then some other sectors that are dealt with specifically, which I won't get into now because I'm conscious of time and there are other people with more interesting things to say. So every company ultimately that is sort of not tiny is going to have to understand the ESRs and to publish reports in accordance with them. And again, typically those, if you don't do the reporting, that will be dealt with by the local enforcer, whether it's a company regulator or a consumer regulator, or whichever body each individual country chooses. But there are also powers for companies who feel they've been hurt by a company that has failed to report its environmental impact to bring private actions as well. So we potentially have the opportunity for pressure group to introduce litigation, sue people for saying you haven't done what you should have done in respect of reporting. So that's probably enough from me.
Before we could go in, John, you said obviously there's this big rule coming in now with the reporting, but the three ones you mentioned before, and you pointed out that only one, the AI one, had a little bit of sustainability, the others had none. So my question is really, do you see the future of this kind of in this area being, we're going to have these big, powerful sustainability regulations and the rest of the world will just carry on and the big, or do you see more a future where sustainability is going to come a little bit into everything?
I think it will come into everything. There is a question about who looks after it, right? So the reporting thing is kind of in the company law space, so it applies to all company laws. But actually for a regulated sector like the media, you would really expect the media regulators to be taking a lead in challenging the organizations they regulate to say, how are you dealing with sustainability? What are the plans, and how are you responding? Now, we're seeing a little of that, particularly in terms of kind of resilience and how challenging organizations to deal with. Media companies have to demonstrate that they have suitable sort of recourse and backup if things go wrong. If there's a big environmental disaster, so if there was if the flood barrier in London failed, the BBC needs to know that it can stay on air, and if the electric grid goes down in London. So they're being challenged on sort of very specific operational aspects, but in terms of their general approach to sustainability, I think we will see more from the regulators. I think it will just take some time.
Just to paraphrase that I've understood, we will still see these big specific regulations just focusing, but we can expect everything in our industry to start having a coat of paint that will have the sustainability side too.
Yeah,
thanks.
absolutely.
Are you here, Arianna?
Hi, everyone. Hi. Yeah, I'm here. Happy New Year, everyone, and happy to be here. I just wanted to say thanks for the invitation and to the organizational team. Wonderful job. And the choice of topic is also very timely. So as I'm sure also John agrees about. And yeah, just wanted to maybe start with reconnecting a bit to the bigger picture on sustainability. So it's pretty obvious right now that most of the regulation that's coming up relates to climate change in some way. And when we speak about reporting, often we kind of lose track of the final aim that we want to kind of achieve, and that it's important to talk about reporting for transparency and to kind of not repeat the things that we've done in the past, maybe. So I think it's important to keep that in mind a bit. And also a bit of the context that we're in with this reporting. So since the passing of the European Green Deal, a lot of change has happened. We had COVID-19 and the energy crisis, and these circumstances, I think, have highlighted need to think about the impact of industry more, but also their energy intensity, the impact of new technologies in general on the environment. And as we go forward with digitalizing, and also the media industry is, of course, part of that. We also move forward with reporting on how companies are doing good and how they're not doing so good in dealing with climate change or mitigating climate change. I think I'm going to focus mostly on, because I'm a PhD at the European University Institute. Sorry, I forgot to say that at the beginning, but my project is mostly on digital infrastructure and the environmental aspects of that. I think speaking of digital infrastructure, about the infrastructure that actually underpins a lot of industries as the media sector is very important because it's often a bit overlooked as a topic, and it is revealing itself as one of the most important things that we have to be sure that we have and that works well when we talk about a lot of other industries. So data centers specifically are the thing that I'm mostly dealing with, and especially in reaction to the energy crisis, these facilities have come under fire because of their energy intensity and other headlines that have been reported about water consumption, raw materials, a lot of them to build servers. So Data centers, as most of you probably know, they are at the backbone, like they are the infrastructure at the basis of many sectors, from banking, trading to global transport. And also they are the backbone of the media sector as we go towards, of course, modern media companies, which are becoming more mobile and global. It is inefficient for companies to own their own infrastructure, required to manage the data that they use in their daily operations. And so it is much more optimal to use data centers in a location where these data can be surely secured and accessed whenever needed. So that's why it is important that we talk about the actual compliance of data centers with sustainability, because there are a lot of things that are happening in the media. Headlines have drawn a bit of attention by the Commission specifically, and also in some member states, particularly the Netherlands and Ireland, they have found themselves with a high energy consumption by data centers. And for example, like the Commission reports in the latest regulation of a 3.21% of the union's electricity demand by 2030, if development continues on the current trajectory, which is a considerate number. And others, as I said, especially in the UK, report of high consumption of water. One thing that's also drawing attention is the consumption of the purchasing of land, especially in the Netherlands and in rural areas, especially for hyperscale data centers, so the big names. This is drawing a bit of attention because of the conflict with local communities. So the question is also, how can we deal with that? And with the effects that the infrastructure that we build our industries on has on the neighboring communities. So yeah, these problems highlight a bit the material aspect of software that we use in applications that are the basis of several industries. And because the sector was relatively new, or because of a marketing effort, it was not regulated that much before. The actual effort that have started, I think, a couple of years ago by the Commission to actually regulate digital infrastructure from its sustainability point of view. The upcoming regulations that John has already touched upon a bit also affect data centers and digital infrastructure. They have, I think, two characteristics mainly. So they are regulation by information, which means that, of course, we steer the economy and actors to choose and act green, putting information at their disposal to actually change their behavior. And also, one other thing is that they are representative of a shift to a value chain approach that we have observed in the course of the latest years by the Commission, so that we kind of consider, for example, in the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, it adopts a value chain approach, so we can kind of see from the start and up to the final product what industries are doing in terms of sustainability. And so what do we actually have to look out for? As John has already touched a bit upon, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive will touch upon the media industry and the data centers, so their infrastructure. And what's interesting here is that because of their role as infrastructure for media companies, data center emissions will constitute a part of the emissions to be reported by media companies. So we'll have as I'm sure somebody will also expand on later on, but we have scope 3 emissions, which are basically, as I was saying, the value chain emissions, including both upstream and downstream emissions, excluding energy because that's scope 2. So basically these scope 3 emissions will also make it so that media companies will have to report on data center emissions. At least that's how the hypothesis goes, that this will kind of change the relationship by media towards data centers, in the sense that you will not only choose a data center because of its proximity to customers or low latency or cost benefit analysis, although these will remain, of course, main points, but that you will also kind of need to consider the sustainability of data centers themselves when you're choosing that infrastructure for your company. So this is something maybe to look out for. And the sustainability of data centers will not only be measured through the reports of the Corporate Sustainability Directive, which will be public, but also it will be informed kind of by the Energy Efficiency Directive, which is another directive that's in the scope. There are a lot, but basically it says that data centers above 500 kilowatts of IT power installed, so not, a decent size, have to report on a series of data, key performance indicators on their sustainability, their energy consumption, water consumption, and others. And the aggregated data will be available in a public database. So that is also one factor to take into account in terms of reporting. And There's also the taxonomy regulation, which is an important tool. And basically, the taxonomy defines what counts as an economic activity that is sustainable, put it very, very simply. And in the case of data centers, it's basically respecting the best practices of the Code of Conduct on energy efficiency. And the Code of Conduct has been in place for 10 years now. And so the participation to the Code of Conduct is something that the media industry might want to look at when choosing a data center. And if I can conclude with a couple of points that remain kind of open in this sense, we've seen what to look out for. But I think that there are still two open points, which are the future kind of beyond information gathering. So we know that mostly regulation information gathering is the first stage of maybe reaching for either the carrot or the stick in this sense. And so it will be interesting to see what the Commission does after they have data on how actually data centers are consuming, or which instruments they choose to take. And the social aspect of digital infrastructure is still a very open point. So how do we deal with the not in my backyard kind of phenomenon for this type of infrastructure, which is very new, and it's still an open point. And in general, my feeling, and also the feeling I think a lot of people share, is that the Commission wants to see in this first stage a kind of willingness to comply, to kind of understand what to do afterwards. And so other stages will follow, as John also said, and it's important to keep in mind that these stages will, businesses should take in mind that these stages will probably follow, and it will be a continued thing. So yeah, that's how I would conclude. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arianna. So just before I let you go, that was an interesting take on the regulation, but you kind of focused almost exclusively on data centers. So
yeah.
by taking that, is that because you think where you're coming from academia, that data centers is the most important place and we should do that as a matter of urgency? Or is it because data centers are perhaps easier to comprehend than, say, media consumption or media transport?
Yeah, I think, thanks for the question. I think it's a mixture of both. I started from the assumption that data centers were not investigated that much, at least from the legal point of view and in academia. So that was a gap that I kind of wanted to fill. It's easier to start with the infrastructure in a sense, because when you talk about software, there are a lot of other factors that come into place. But I think ultimately software drives the demand of hardware, in the sense that data centers are only responding to a demand that's out there. So I think ultimately that software is also something we should for sure be concerned about. At the moment, I'm only working on data centers, but who knows what the future holds. So
thanks. I'm sure there'll be more questions coming up in the chat for you, so stay around. So there's a snowstorm currently going on in Geneva, so we're missing Sophia, who should join us any minute. But in the meantime, perhaps Eileen, who is supposed to speak afterwards, you could speak now. And the segue into that is we've just had some high-level presentations on these reporting things, but in the real world, what kind of tools are you using operationally at the moment, Eileen?
Well, first of all, it's an honor to be here and share our experiences like this. And I'm the sustainability manager for the national broadcaster in Ireland. There's about 1,700 employees, and we do have a central studios in Donnybrook, but also we have smaller outlets in other parts of the country. We broadcast TV, radio, and online. And the challenges for me as the sustainability manager go back many years in the context of varying changes in legislation, right back to, 20 years ago with Waste Management Acts and all the others, the platter of legislation that's come down the line, and all very important. And one of the things we did many years ago to help us to manage the type of things that were hitting us was to develop a Green Broadcaster Advisory Group process. And this effectively is a group of people, all of whom have a role within sustainability, albeit a benign one. It might be, waste management, it might be procurement, it might be security, allowing stuff on, but all of the people on the group have a role in the sustainability journey that RTE is taking. And we have set up a SharePoint site, and on this site, we update it with regular documents and information and support data. And also we have meetings regularly, and those minutes of those meetings go into that SharePoint site. And I'm going to share my screen with you just to give you an idea of what our site looks like. So I'll just go into this now and see, can I get this for you? So at the top, we have a countdown to 2030 because we have targets to 2030, and we have all of our notes are in here. We have various documents. We have our calendar for our Green Broadcaster meetings on the right-hand side. And we have other reports and documents, our roadmap, RTE's roadmap, and we have various other things included, which are a virtual forest, which we set up where we have a learning experience for staff who download the app. And then when they achieve the learnings, they gain a virtual tree for RTE's virtual forest, and all kinds of things to build awareness and promote sustainability. But what's particularly significant to this session is the fact that CSRD is becoming an obligation now for organizations to do reporting. And I think it was Darwin who said that we can survive with lots of things, but really it's those who are adaptable that can survive, any changes that happen. And I think what's important for us is that this system allows us to adapt to the type of reporting that we're going to have to be doing as an organization. Because within our minutes and records of our meetings, we have actually included some of the issues that we will need to be reporting on in the context of our government's interpretation of the and application of the CSRD directive. And what that means is the government in Ireland has developed a climate action plan. And because RTE is a semi-state organisation, we are included in the climate action plan and a particular framework which has been given to us to follow. And essentially, this framework hinges upon 5 commitments by the organisation. And the 5 commitments are governance of climate action objectives, 2, emissions measurement and reduction targets, 3, measuring and valuing emissions in investment appraisals, 4, circular economy and green procurement, and 5, climate-related disclosures in financial reporting. So what we have done as part of this tool is we have included those 5 targets on our agenda for every Green Broadcaster meeting we have. And we have allocated, the organisation through its governance has allocated certain members within the organisation, be it in finance or the other relevant areas, who will provide the information and feedback on these targets so that information can be provided for the CSRD obligations. So I suppose that's a whistle-stop tour of the type of thing that we're doing and the tool that we're using. That's essentially what we're doing. And, as I was saying before, because we already had a tool which was measuring what we were doing on site and the projects that we are doing from a sustainability perspective, it was reasonably easy to bring in the new participants that we need in this process to feed us with the information we need in context of CSRD. So I suppose the Green Broadcaster Advisory Group process is now, I suppose it will be called different things in different organizations. It may be called a champion group or an environmental, leaders group, but whatever it's called, it'll be different depending on whatever business it is or organization it is. But essentially, it's probably going to be the same, and that will be a leadership group of people all involved in making sure that the obligations and responsibilities that we all now have are shared and reported on, and the right things are done at the right time. So I suppose that that's all I have to say really on the case tool. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Eileen. I'd like to bring in at this stage Rudolf. Rudolf is our specialist that always stops us going around in circles, chasing our tails by asking difficult questions.
It's really good that we get better reporting directives, and both the CSRD and the Energy Efficiency Directive will definitely help us with regards to the Energy Efficiency Directive and what is needed for data centers. I'm expecting a lot of comments on what the Commission currently has proposed, because on the energy side, it may sound quite logical, kilowatt hours and that kind of stuff. But what the Commission also wants to know how much data traffic there is and how much computing power is installed, capacity power. I don't know how to measure it in gigaflops or whatever, but the Commission isn't too clear about it. And it also wants to know how much storage there is in data centers, which I think many data centers will balk at as well, because on the one hand, that's equipment that customers install in co-location data centers, but also what does it mean? Either you don't know what they're installing, or what is the value of knowing how much storage there is in a place and how to deal with it. In addition, I expect some comments on the efficiency. The Commission wants, for example, the water use efficiency of data centers. But, how to calculate that is a matter of great debate, just like power use efficiency. You can actually increase that power use efficiency by running servers more hot, so that you actually, in relative terms, need less for air conditioning or for the elevator, all that kind of stuff. So on the one hand, it's great that we get more insights, because there is so much bad data around that it really is necessary that we get better data from the data centers, but also from media industry, from the whole value chain. We finally get the data to make decisions on. But on the other hand, this is a step. We're not there yet. And even when we have the reporting, we really have to be aware that it's not so much about what the numbers say, but what we do with it. One of the examples I always use in the Netherlands is that when the banks in the Netherlands and the government moved their equipment from their own private data centers on premise to commercial data centers offsite, the ICT sector's energy consumption rose massively, but nobody combined that energy consumption with the energy consumption of the financial sector and of the public sector to see that overall it stayed flat. So yes, everybody then pointed to, like, the ICT sector, to the official statistics on the ICT sector, and went like, look, it shot up. True, but that's because people had the equipment on site and now have it in a real data center. And so relatively, it's more efficient, but now the blame can be shifted to the ICT sector and say, like, look, they use more energy. No, actually, it shifted from one statistical category to another. And that is, I think, where also the media industry sits in some ways. People look at data consumption, look at energy consumption, divide the two, and go like, look, so many kilowatt hours per gigabyte. So if you don't send enough that much data, then we save energy, which of course is not how you actually save energy if you're a public broadcaster. It's not about not broadcasting. It's about broadcasting in an efficient way. If you look at a cable company, everybody looks at how much energy consumption streaming does, but nobody talks about the VBC and the number of channels that we get sent to us on a daily basis. If you would look at the data consumption of that, it's magic how much data that is, but it doesn't change the energy consumption, and nobody looks at it. These regulations are fantastic in many ways, because there's now so much misinformation also in academia that we're making the wrong decisions. We're reducing bit rates by squeezing everything more together and not looking at how much energy that costs in the CPUs of all the boxes that people have in their homes. instead of looking at it overall. How can we use it more efficiently? It's not about bits, it's about kilowatt hours in the end, and how we can use equipment longer so that we don't need the natural resources to replace them every 5 years. That balance will be helped by this regulation, both the CSRD and the Energy Efficiency Directive. It will help the media industry in some ways to be more clear, but where the various parts are, but still there's a lot more that we need to do.
Gosh, I'm not used to seeing you so positive, Rudolf, but that was really interesting. I just want to make sure I understood something. You were clear on one of your hobby horses that it's not data, it's kilowatt hours. That was one clear point that we often make at Greening of Streaming. But you also kind of touched on another thing, which is that ICT in general and streaming and our industry is also an enablement technology, and we must be careful not to just focus on how much power we consume, how much greenhouse gases we emit, but because a lot of what we do will enable other technologies. I do have a clear question for you, and I want that because all the other speakers earlier can turn their cameras, but we can spotlight them too, because it concerns everybody. Is you spoke about bad data, but you meant when you talk about bad data about the data centers. But what about bad data itself? Is that something that CSRD should one day talk about, or regulators should talk about? The idea we already had last year Sustainability Expert Series sessions where we were talking about 90 to 95% of data stored in the global cloud is put up in the cloud and then left there and never ever accessed. So if we go back to our industry, it could be things like PVR, personal video recording. You have something recorded for you. There again, it's the same kind of figures. About 90% of everything that people record is never ever watched. So here's a question for all the speakers. Is that something that regulation should get involved with?
Well, let me first go against. I actually don't think that that's true. I think that 90% is nonsense.
What is it then if it's not 90%?
Probably less than 20, 30%. And it may sound weird, but if I look at the amount of stuff that I still use from emails like 10, 15 years ago, regularly I dig stuff up that I still need. If I look at the pictures that I made of my family, yes, some of them I don't see for 3, 4 years, and then all of a sudden somebody asks something, what do you think of Austria? And oh yeah, we were there on a holiday, and then you look back at pictures from years ago, or something pops up in one discussion or another. So I actually think it's grossly overestimated how much we don't use. And even in firms, if you send 500 emails with the latest update on a newsletter of the firm, but there are more and more ways these days to not store it 500 times on the same disk, but still have it available. So yeah, I don't think we throw away that much, and we need to throw away that much.
Does anybody else want to jump in? I mean, John, from a regulatory perspective, have you seen any regulations that are starting to think about the quality of data? I mean, it's a very complicated question to say to people, you can save that forever, but this kind of data you can only save for a year. Will we ever get to that kind of situation, do you think?
I think the only place where there is a sort of regulatory oversight around this is in terms of personal data, because under GDPR, you basically have an obligation not to keep data, or organizations have an obligation not to keep data longer than it's needed for. I paraphrase horribly, but that's the broad thrust of GDPR. So there is a kind of regulatory obligation, which is about, the defense of people's own privacy. Why should you keep information about me longer than you need it for? Beyond that, I do think that, you're right that, I mean, even the European reporting standards themselves have had quite a lot of criticism about actually how they go, what they're doing and how they're going about it. So I think you're right to say that the quality of data is a real issue. And I guess the one thing I would say is that where people are using this information publicly, we are seeing an increasing degree of investigation by sort of advertising regulators and consumer regulators into false green claims. So the regulatory action against people greenwashing or making false green claims, we are seeing a significant ramp up in the number of cases that are being brought against people. In the UK recently, we had 2 airlines who've had their advertising campaigns blacklisted by the regulator for making bullshit green claims, if you pardon the expression. There's an investigation on at the moment in relation to one of the biggest FMCG consumer goods producers in terms of sort of false claims about their green credentials. So we are seeing that as, I guess it impacts the media as the supplier of the airtime that people use to present false claims. But I think that that will flow back into the whole issue of how accurate is the data, because people are using, there's still quite a lot of greenwashing out there.
Well, John, I have a more precise question then. I mean, we saw in 2023, the TV regulations changed for 8K TVs, and the out-of-the-box TVs that were available early 2023 could no longer be sold. So if I take a free market kind of consumer perspective, I want to do what the hell I want, and you leave me alone, regulators. The regulators have come and said, sorry, Ben, you can't buy that 8K TV anymore. Oh my God, I can't buy an 8K TV anymore. So is it actually different if one day, in a few years' time, the regulators turn around and say, hey, Ben, you can no longer store 8K content in any cloud. We've forbidden it because we don't see the need for it, and it uses a huge amount of resources, and, there's 600 million of you in Europe, and that's the way. So can't you see a future where what we actually store in the cloud would be regulated?
Maybe. I mean, I think this is one of those complicated areas where you go, okay, if the EU says that, then isn't there a market for somebody to come on and offer you, cloud storage in the US or in the Cayman Islands or somewhere else where their regulation is weaker? Because that's sort of one of the issues here. They can easily stop you buying an 8K TV. It's much harder to regulate something like cloud storage on a global basis. So I think that's going to be one of the interesting areas here. There is some stuff in the AI Act that is surprisingly aggressive about what us lawyers glamorously refer to as extraterritorial effect. The fact that if you're a US company making your AI product available to UK customers, even if you are no storage or any other software sitting in, everything is sitting on US servers, you're still going to be subject to the European rules on AI if you're allowing European customers to. That's kind of quite a big kind of macro political question.
We have some questions that have come in on the chat. And so one is from Tommy. And so, Tommy, I'm not going to be caught out this time. I'm going to read it as is. It's very small. So for Eileen, I've seen a projection that data centers could be using 30% of Ireland's energy supply within the next 10 years, facilitated by the country's tax haven status. What actions is RTE taking to reduce its own contribution to this energy growth over the next decade? And would RTE consider migrating compute resources to overseas data center providers if there were clear energy efficiencies?
That question really I will answer, in context of my role for the organization. And from a sustainability perspective, we will always do and promote whatever is the most sustainable for the organization, and also in context of our Scope 3 emissions. We are on a journey, obviously, of reducing all of our carbon impact, and we are doing that through our Green Broadcaster tool. And we have our targets, the reductions of our carbon 50% by 2030, and other targets within our energy team. And, I think we all have to be cognizant of our circle of control. But, you know, if you work on the basis and the governance and the principle that we are doing what is sustainable or trying to do what is sustainable, hopefully that will answer the question of the person asking. One broadcaster can't do everything, but we are working also with Commissioner Mann and part of a media network within Ireland. And there's ongoing discussions about sustainability in that regard. I think just reflecting on some of the previous discussions about data centers and storage of data, the one comment I would make is I think it will be beholden upon all companies, whether they're, you know, broadcasters or any company, as it is to us as individuals, to limit the amount of storage we have from a cost perspective, because, you know, economics will predict there's some companies who are spending millions and billions on storage, and going forward with, reduction of resources that are available for people and costs, you know, particularly for public service broadcasters who are using license fee payers' money. I think we all have a duty to try and restrict the amount of storage we have to what's necessary, and, you know, reduce all our costs and our efficiencies, because to me, sustainability is very much about resource management. So, and I think the other reason would be for data protection, that, you know, we need to know what we're storing, and we need to know that we want to store that. And if we don't want to store it anymore, or shouldn't be storing it, we don't store it anymore, and we delete it and reduce our costs. So I think there's a few things. I think economics is going to force it from a cost perspective, that it costs money to store as well. Regulatory is one side of it, but cost is another. So I think no broadcaster would want to be storing more than what they should be. And these issues that the questioner has made are very valid. And I applaud them, that we need to take accountability and responsibility for what we're storing and what we're generating in the context of carbon impact. I hope that answers the question.
I'm sure it is, and if it doesn't, I'm sure we will get a follow-up question. One last question before we open everybody's mics. Perhaps I'll ask it to Arianna. It was a question from Neil from the Flint. Could you see any specific carbon budgets being eventually allotted to companies or data centers or projects? And would then, you know, which organizations would then have to work with those? Within those?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Above a certain threshold of emissions, they're already subject to the European trading system, so they should have already allotted emission trading allowances. I think it is part of what we see, although the Commission is changing a bit its approach with stricter regulation for data centers specifically, and so top-down approach mostly. But I think it's still part of the narrative to kind of try to make a market for so to kind of try and rely a lot on emission trading, because that's seen as still as an efficient way of regulating emission intensive industries. For what we can see, mostly the Commission is focusing on energy consumption because of the energy crisis mostly. The focus right now is on other instruments, I would say, such as the Energy Efficiency Directive. But yeah, it's definitely on the list, I would say. Yeah.